What if the key to unlocking a past you never knew you had was resting on the finger of a stranger? What if a life of hardship, of scraping by, of praying for a miracle, was all built upon a single devastating lie? For one waitress, a young woman whose world was confined to the sticky tables of a diner and the four walls of a cramped apartment, a single, trembling observation was about to change everything. This is a story about a ring, a secret buried in ash and time, and a test of character so profound it could either shatter a fragile hope or forge a destiny that was stolen at birth. The biting November wind whipped around the corner of Elm Street, rattling the large plate-glass window of the Morning Glory diner. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon, stale coffee, and the quiet desperation of a Tuesday morning. For Ilara Vance, this was the scent of survival. At 24, she moved with a practiced economy of motion that belied the deep weariness in her bones. Her life was a repeating loop. Wake before dawn in the shoebox apartment she shared with her mother. Check the wheezing nebulizer that was her mother's constant companion. Work a 10-hour shift on her feet, and return home to do it all again. Her mother, Sarah, was her world. A woman who had once been vibrant, now tethered to a life indoors by a chronic respiratory illness that doctors spoke of in hushed, expensive terms. Every dollar Ilara earned, every tip she pocketed with a grateful smile, went into a small tin box labeled for Mama. It was never enough. The eviction notice taped to their apartment door was a constant, glaring reminder of their precarity. Felt like they were drowning in slow motion. This morning was no different. Ilara refilled coffee cups, her smile a well-practiced mask that hid the frantic calculations churning in her mind. $47 short on the rent, due Friday. The pharmacy had called again about the overdue prescription. She wiped down a booth, the vinyl cracked and peeling like a sunburnt lip, and felt a familiar knot of despair tighten in her stomach. It was in that moment that the bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer so out of place he seemed to have stepped in from another dimension. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, dressed in a charcoal gray suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to hum with its own silent authority. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of stern, impassive control. He moved with a stillness that commanded the room. The usual diner chatter seemed to dim in his presence. He chose a booth in the far corner, the one with the best view of the street, and placed a sleek leather briefcase on the seat beside him. The other patrons, truck drivers and office clerks, glanced at him, then quickly looked away, as if his wealth were a light too bright to stare at. Ilara's boss, Sal, a burly man with a kind heart hidden under layers of gruffness, nudged her. "Go on, table 4. Don't keep the King of England waiting." Taking a deep breath, Ilara grabbed a menu and a glass of water. As she approached the table, she felt a wave of intimidation. He wasn't looking at the menu. He was staring out the window, his expression distant, melancholic. A profound loneliness radiated from him, an aura so palpable it cut through the diner's greasy warmth. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Welcome to the Morning Glory. Can I get you started with some coffee?" He turned his gaze from the window to her, and his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, seemed to look right through her. They were eyes that had seen too much, that held a universe of unspoken sorrow. "Coffee. Black," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the dark liquid from the glass pot into a thick ceramic mug. It was then, as he reached for the cup, that she saw it. On the fourth finger of his right hand he wore a ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a statement, a heavy gold signet ring, intricately carved with the image of a phoenix, its wings outstretched as it rose from a bed of exquisitely detailed flames. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. But it wasn't just the beauty of the ring that made her gasp, a small, involuntary sound. It was the shock of recognition. A jolt, electric and absolute, shot through her. She had seen that design before, not on a stranger, not in a magazine, but hidden away in the dark, quiet corners of her own life. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, A hushed, trembling whisper. "Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry to bother you. But that's a beautiful ring." She paused, her heart hammering against her ribs. "My mother. She has one just like it." The man's composure, so absolute just a moment before, fractured. His hand froze midway to the cup. The mask of indifference fell away, and for a single stark second, his face was a canvas of raw, unadulterated shock. His sharp blue eyes widened, zeroing in on her face, searching, questioning. The air between them crackled with a sudden, inexplicable tension. The low hum of the diner faded into a dull roar in her ears. In that moment, the world tilted on its axis. The past, a country she had never known, had just reached out and tapped her on the shoulder. And nothing would ever be the same. The man, Alistair Sterling, snatched his hand back as if burned. The brief window into his soul slammed shut, replaced by a wall of ice. "That's impossible," he stated, his voice flat and cold, each word a carefully placed stone. He didn't ask a question. He delivered a verdict. He looked down at his ring, then back at Alara, his gaze now sharp with suspicion, as if she were a charlatan performing a cheap street trick. "You're mistaken." Alara felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. Of course she was mistaken. What were the chances? Her mother's ring was a simple, worn thing she kept in a small velvet pouch, something Alara had only glimpsed a few times in her life. This man was a billionaire, if the whispers that had started to circulate through the diner were true. His ring was probably worth more than their apartment, their medical debt, their entire lives combined. I'm sorry," she stammered, backing away from the table. "Please, forgive me. I shouldn't have said anything." He said nothing, simply staring at her with an unnerving intensity. He took a single, deliberate sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Alara felt a desperate urge to flee, to hide in the kitchen, to become invisible. She mumbled something about getting his order and practically ran to the pass-through window, her cheeks burning. Sal shot her a questioning look. "You okay, kid? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," she lied, her voice shaky. "Just tired." For the next 20 minutes, she avoided the corner booth, asking another waitress to take the man's food order. A simple toast he barely touched. She could feel his eyes on her as she moved through the diner, a heavy, analytical gaze that made her skin crawl. It wasn't menacing, not exactly. It was something far more unsettling. It was searching. Finally, he stood, placed a crisp $100 bill on the table, an absurd amount for a $3 coffee and toast, and walked out without a backward glance. The bell chimed his departure, and the diner seemed to exhale collectively. Alara thought that was the end of it. A strange, embarrassing encounter. A story she might one day tell with a nervous laugh. She tried to push it from her mind, focusing on the rhythm of her work, the endless cycle of clearing plates and wiping tables. But the image of the ring, and the flicker of raw emotion in the man's eyes, was seared into her memory. Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush died down, a long black sedan, sleek and silent as a panther, pulled up in front of the diner. It idled by the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the gray, weary sky. Sal whistled under his breath. "Looks like your boyfriend's back." Alara's heart leaped into her throat. A man in a suit, younger and less imposing than the first, stepped out of the passenger side. He entered the diner, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Alara. He walked directly toward her, his expression neutral, professional. "Are you Miss Alara Vance?" he asked. His voice was polite but held no warmth. "Yes," she answered, wiping her damp hands on her apron. The man produced a small, thick card from his breast pocket. It was embossed with a single, stylized S. "My name is Arthur Harrison. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Alistair Sterling." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "Mr. Sterling requests your presence at his office this evening at 6 o'clock. He wishes to discuss your earlier comment." Alara stared at the card, then back at the man, her mind reeling. Discuss my comment? About the ring. That is correct, Mr. Harrison said. A car will be waiting for you outside your residence at 5:30. Your address on file with this establishment is correct, I presume. She nodded numbly. An address on file? They had already looked her up. A chill traced its way down her spine. This was moving too fast, spiraling into something she couldn't comprehend. I don't know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I have to get home to my mother. Mr. Sterling is aware of your mother's condition, the assistant replied smoothly, a hint of something unreadable in his tone. He is a very persuasive man. He strongly advises you to attend. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. He gave a curt nod, turned, and walked out, leaving Alara standing in the middle of the diner, holding a card that felt as heavy as a block of gold. That evening, the apartment felt smaller, more suffocating than ever. Alara sat on the edge of her mother's bed, holding the heavy cream-colored card. She explained the bizarre sequence of events, her voice hushed with a mixture of fear and a tiny, flickering ember of hope she dared not name. Sarah, propped up against a mountain of pillows, listened, her breathing shallow. When Alara finished, her mother's face, usually gentle even in its weariness, was pale and rigid with fear. Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape. You must not go, Alara, Sarah whispered, her voice raspy. Forget you ever saw that man. Forget the ring. It's nothing. It means nothing. But Mama, how can it be nothing? Alara pressed, her own confusion mounting. You were always so secretive about it. And the way he looked, it was like I'd told him I knew his deepest secret. She leaned forward. Who is he? And where did you get that ring? It was a gift, Sarah insisted, her voice rising with uncharacteristic sharpness. A long time ago from a friend. A cheap copy of something she'd seen. This worthless, a piece of costume jewelry. Now drop it. Her hand, thin and trembling, reached out and clutched Alara's arm. Promise me you won't go. Some people, some worlds, they are not for us. They bring nothing but trouble. The sheer terror in her mother's eyes stunned Alara into silence. She had never seen her mother like this. It wasn't just protective worry. It was primal fear. But her mother's reaction, meant to dissuade her, had the opposite effect. Confirmed that the ring was not just a coincidence. It was a key to what she didn't know. She looked from her mother's frightened face to the eviction notice on the door. She thought of the condescending tone of the pharmacist, the weight of their poverty that pressed down on her every single day. The man in the diner represented a world of power and resources beyond her wildest imagination. What if this was the miracle she had been praying for? A dangerous, terrifying, incomprehensible miracle, but a miracle nonetheless. I have to go, Mama, Alara said softly but firmly, her decision solidifying in her heart. If there's even a 1 in a million chance this could help you, I have to take it. I have to know. At exactly 5:30, the same black sedan was waiting outside their crumbling apartment building, a silent, dark promise in the twilight. Taking one last look at her home, Alara Vance smoothed down her best, and only blouse, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked out to meet her fate. The journey to the heart of the city was a silent, surreal glide through a world Alara only ever saw from a distance. The car moved through the gritty, familiar streets of her neighborhood and transitioned seamlessly into the glittering canyons of downtown, where towers of glass and steel clawed at the night sky. The Sterling Enterprises building was the tallest of them all, a monument of dark glass and polished granite that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was less a building and more a declaration of dominance over the very skyline. Mr. Harrison met her in the marble-floored lobby, a cavernous space so quiet she could hear the echo of her own nervous heartbeat. He led her to a private elevator, which ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching swiftness. There were no buttons, only a single, discreet panel that Mr. Harrison touched with a key card. They were going to the top, the penthouse. The elevator doors opened directly into Alistair Sterling's office. The space was vast, minimalist, and breathtaking. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. A single, massive desk of dark, polished wood sat in the center of the room, as stark and imposing as a sacrificial altar. Alistair Sterling stood behind it, not looking at the view, but at her. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Thank you for coming." "You didn't give me much of a choice," Elara replied, surprised at her own boldness. She clutched her worn handbag, her only shield in this arena of power. A flicker of something, perhaps respect, crossed his features. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a single leather chair positioned in front of the desk. It felt less like an invitation and more like placing a specimen under a microscope. She sat, perching on the edge of the plush leather. He remained standing, a deliberate power play. He circled the desk and stood before her, his hands clasped behind his back. "The ring," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You said your mother has one like it. I want you to tell me everything. Where did she get it? How long has she had it? Who is your father? I want to know who you are." The questions came like bullets, rapid-fire and invasive. Elara felt a surge of defensiveness, but she met his gaze. She had come this far. She thought of her mother's fear, of the eviction notice, of the suffocating weight of it all. "My mother's name is Sarah Vance. As for the ring, she's had it as long as I can remember. She keeps it hidden away. She told me it was a cheap gift from an old friend, but when I told her about you, she was terrified. She begged me not to come here." "And your father?" Alistair pressed, his eyes narrowing. A pang of old, familiar pain went through her. "I never knew him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "My mother never speaks of him. He died before I was born. That's all I know." She instinctively touched the small lump under her blouse. The locket she always wore, containing a faded, blurry picture of a man she didn't know and a tiny, folded piece of paper. Alistair watched the small gesture, his gaze analytical. He was silent for a long time, studying her face, her eyes, the way she held herself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her circumstances. The silence was a weapon, designed to unnerve her, to make her babble, to expose a lie. But Elara held her ground, her resolve hardening. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother is ill, it wasn't a question." "Yes," Elara said. "She has a severe chronic respiratory condition. We can't afford the proper care." He walked back behind his desk and sat down, a king returning to his throne. He steepled his fingers, the phoenix ring glinting under the soft, recessed lighting. "I am going to make you an offer, Miss Vance. It is unorthodox, but I am a man who values answers above all else." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I will assume all financial responsibility for your mother's medical care. I will have her moved to the finest private hospital in the state. She will be seen by the best specialists. Every bill, every treatment, every expense will be covered." Elara's breath caught in her throat. It was everything she had ever prayed for, a deliverance so complete it felt unreal. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that for us?" "Because nothing is free, Miss Vance," he said, his voice turning to steel. "In exchange, I require your full cooperation. You will grant me access to your mother. You will allow me to speak with her. And you will bring me her ring. I need to see it for myself," he paused. "You will help me uncover the truth of how a woman in your mother's position came to possess an object that is deeply personal to my family. You will not ask questions. You will simply facilitate." The offer hung in the air, a lifeline entwined with a snake. He was offering to save her mother's life, but the price was to betray her mother's desperate wish for secrecy, to force a confrontation her mother clearly dreaded. But what choice did she have? It was a devil's bargain, but one side of the scale held her mother's health, her very life. The other held a secret. There was no contest. "I agree," Elara said, her voice clear and steady, surprising them both. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over her. For the first time in years, she could breathe. "I'll do it." Alistair Sterling gave a single, sharp nod. "Good. Mr. Harrison will handle the arrangements. They will begin tonight." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. The warmth of the offer was already gone, replaced by the same cold, transactional efficiency. As Alara was escorted out of the silent, opulent office and back down to the real world, she felt a dizzying mix of elation and dread. She had just saved her mother, but she had a chilling feeling she had also just opened Pandora's box. The next 48 hours were a blur of orchestrated efficiency. True to Alistair Sterling's word, his power moved with the swift, silent force of a tidal wave. A private ambulance, staffed with calm, professional paramedics, arrived at their cramped apartment. Sarah, confused and frightened, was transferred with gentle expertise. Alara rode with her to the Axis Alignment Medical Center, a facility that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Sarah was settled into a spacious private suite with a view of a serene garden, a stark contrast to the peeling paint and water-stained ceiling of her bedroom. A team of renowned specialists was already reviewing her case. For Alara, it was like watching a film of someone else's life. She walked the polished corridors in a daze, the scent of antiseptic and money replacing the familiar smell of grease and despair. She sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand, trying to soothe her fears while grappling with her own. Sarah was weak but stable, the constant struggle for breath already easing thanks to the advanced equipment. Yet, a deep, anxious fear remained in her eyes. "Alara, what have you done?" she would whisper, her voice frail. "This man, you don't understand." Alara didn't understand. But for now, the profound relief of seeing her mother comfortable and cared for eclipsed everything else. She had made a deal, and Alistair Sterling was holding up his end of the bargain. Meanwhile, in the sterile heights of the Sterling Enterprises Tower, the ripples of Alistair's actions were beginning to spread. His nephew, Marcus Thorne, the ambitious and calculating chief operating officer of the company, had noticed the shift in his uncle's behavior. Alistair, usually consumed by quarterly reports and market projections, was distracted, withdrawn. And there were whispers from the accounting department, a new, open-ended, and highly unusual expenditure for private medical care, authorized directly by Alistair himself. Marcus, a man in his late 30s with a politician's smile that never reached his cold, assessing eyes, decided to investigate. He viewed his uncle's empire not as a family legacy but as his birthright, a prize he had been patiently waiting to claim. Any deviation from the norm, any unpredictable variable was a threat. And this waitress, this Alara Vance, was the most unpredictable variable he had seen in years. He strode into Alistair's penthouse office without knocking, a breach of protocol he knew would irritate his uncle. "Alistair," he began, his tone a carefully calibrated mix of concern and accusation. "I've been hearing things about a significant personal expenditure. For a woman I'm told is a waitress from some greasy spoon in the industrial district." Alistair didn't look up from the file he was reading. "My personal finances are my own concern, Marcus." "It becomes my concern when it involves the Sterling name," Marcus retorted, stepping closer to the desk. "Who is this woman?" "I had my assistant do a preliminary background check. She has nothing, less than nothing. She lives in a slum, drowning in debt. It's the oldest story in the book, Uncle. A young woman sees a wealthy, lonely old man and spins a sob story. You're being scammed." Alistair finally looked up, his blue eyes glinting with annoyance. "I am perfectly capable of identifying a scam, as you so crudely put it. This is a private matter. It does not concern you. See to the Ethelred merger. That does concern you." The dismissal was sharp and absolute. It stung Marcus's pride, but more than that, it stoked his suspicion. His uncle was hiding something. For the first time in 2 decades, something had broken through Alistair's carefully constructed shell of apathy. Marcus wouldn't let it go. If his uncle wouldn't tell him what was going on, he would find out for himself. He would dig into this Alara Vance's life and find whatever dirt was necessary to expose her as a fraud and remove her from the equation. His inheritance depended on it. Later that day, following the instructions of his bargain, Alistair arrived at the hospital. He carried a small, velvet-lined box. He found Alara sitting in a chair by the window of her mother's suite. She stood respectfully when he entered. "Miss Vance," he acknowledged with a nod. He then turned his attention to the woman in the bed. Sarah, who had been dozing, awoke with a start. When she saw Alistair Sterling standing at the foot of her bed, all the color drained from her face. She looked at him with sheer, unadulterated terror, shrinking back against her pillows as if he were a specter from a nightmare. "Sarah Vance?" Alistair asked, his voice softer than Alara had ever heard it, yet still laced with an unnerving intensity. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The heart monitor beside her bed began to beep at a faster, more urgent tempo. "Mama, it's okay," Alara said, rushing to her side. "This is Mr. Sterling. He's the one who's helping us." But Sarah wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on Alistair. "Go away," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, just leave us alone." Alistair ignored her plea. He stepped closer and opened the box he was holding. Inside, nestled on black satin, was his phoenix ring. He held it out. "I was told you have one just like this," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I need to know where you got it." At the sight of the ring, a choked sob escaped Sarah's lips. She turned her face away, burying it in the pillow, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, her voice muffled. "I don't know anything. Get out." A nurse, alerted by the frantic beeping of the monitor, hurried into the room. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're upsetting my patient." Alistair hesitated, his face a mask of frustration and confusion. He looked from the terrified woman in the bed to Alara, who stood helplessly, torn between her mother's fear and her obligation to this powerful man. With a curt, frustrated sigh, he snapped the box shut, turned on his heel, and left the room without another word. The silence he left behind was heavy with unanswered questions and a fear so profound Alara could feel it in the air, cold and suffocating. Her mother's terror wasn't just about a secret. It was about this specific man. The key to the mystery wasn't just the ring. It was Alistair Sterling himself. With Sarah settled in the hospital, Alara returned to their small apartment to pack her mother's essential belongings. The task was melancholic, each object a testament to a life lived on the margins. The worn-out armchair where Sarah used to sit and read, the chipped teacup that was her favorite, the small collection of books with cracked spines. The silence of the apartment, usually a comfort, now felt heavy and empty. The eviction notice still taped to the door was a mocking reminder of the life they had just narrowly escaped. As she cleared out her mother's bedside table, her fingers brushed against a loose floorboard underneath. It was almost imperceptible, but Alara's life had trained her to notice small imperfections. Curious, she pried at it with her fingernails. It came up with a soft groan of old wood. Beneath it, nestled in the dark, dusty space, was a small, locked metal box, tarnished with age. Her heart began to beat a little faster. This was it. This had to be where her mother kept the ring and whatever other secrets she guarded so fiercely. She searched her mother's drawers and found a small, ornate key hidden in a sewing kit. It fit the lock perfectly. With a trembling hand, she turned the key. The lock clicked open. She lifted the lid. On top, lying on a bed of faded cotton, was the ring. It was, as she had remembered, a smaller, simpler version of Alistair's. The phoenix was there, rendered in the same design, but the gold was less lustrous, the details less sharp. It was undeniably a matched pair. Seeing it now, holding its cool weight in her palm, erased any doubt. This was not a coincidence. But it was what lay beneath the ring that made the air leave her lungs in a sudden, sharp gasp. It was a small stack of yellowed, brittle papers, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Carefully, She untied the ribbon and unfolded the top document. Her eyes scanned the official-looking print, and the world seemed to slow down, the words blurring and then snapping into a focus so sharp it felt like a physical blow. It was a birth certificate, issued by the state 24 years ago. The name of the child was listed as Lilia Annalise Sterling. The date of birth was her own. And under the section for father, the name was printed in stark, undeniable black ink. Alastair James Sterling. The mother's name was Annalise Dubois Sterling. Alara sank to the floor, the document trembling in her hand. Lilia Sterling. Couldn't be. It was a mistake, a forgery, a cruel joke. But her mind was racing, connecting dots she never knew existed. Sterling. The name on the building, the name of the man whose ring matched her mother's, the man now paying for her mother's care. Her name. Frantically, she looked at the other papers. There were several letters, the handwriting elegant and looping. They were written by Annalise to a dear friend named Claire. They spoke of her profound love for her husband, Alastair, a brilliant man who was often distant and consumed by his work, but whose heart, she wrote, was good and true. They spoke of her excitement and her fears about becoming a mother. In the last letter, dated only a week before Alara's birthday, she wrote, Alastair has commissioned a pair of rings for us, a matching set, a phoenix, for our new life, rising from the ashes of his family's disapproval. He says it will be our family crest, for me, for him, and for our little Lilia. The final document was a hospital admittance form for Annalise Sterling, for the maternity ward at St. Jude's General Hospital, the same hospital that had been torn down 15 years ago after a catastrophic fire. Alara felt dizzy, nauseous. The narrative of her life, the simple, sad story of a girl whose father had died and whose mother was sick, was a lie, a complete and utter fabrication. Her name wasn't Alara Vance. It was Lilia Sterling, and the cold, powerful billionaire who had re-entered her life was not a stranger. He was her father. She didn't know how long she sat there on the floor, surrounded by the ghost of a life she should have had. The shock was a physical weight, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Finally, driven by a desperate need for answers, she gathered the papers, put them in her handbag, and went back to the hospital. She found her mother sleeping peacefully, her breath even and deep for the first time in years. Alara didn't want to wake her, didn't want to shatter this fragile peace. But she had to. The lie was too big, the silence too vast. She gently shook her mother's shoulder. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Alara, honey, what is it? You look so pale. Without a word, Alara laid the birth certificate on the blanket over her mother's lap. Sarah stared at it. Her peaceful expression dissolved, replaced by the same raw terror Alara had seen when Alastair was in the room. Her face crumpled, and a deep, guttural sob tore from her throat. The sound was one of pure, soul-deep grief. You found it, she wept. Oh, my child, my sweet, sweet child. I am so sorry. The time for lies was over. Sitting there, in the quiet, sterile room, with the city lights beginning to glow outside the window, Sarah Vance finally confessed. Her voice was weak, broken by tears, but she spoke with the urgency of someone unburdening a lifetime of secrets. My real name is Sarah Gable, she began, her eyes fixed on a distant point in the past. I was a nurse, a young nurse at St. Jude's General Hospital. That's where I met her. Annalise Sterling, a soft, sad smile touched her lips. She was sunshine. That's the only way to describe her. She was assigned to my care in the maternity ward. She was so kind, so full of life. Not like you'd expect the wife of a man like that to be. She was down to earth. We became friends. Sarah took a shaky breath. She told me all about her life, about Alastair, how she met him at an art gallery, how his family, especially his father, hated her. They thought she was a gold digger, not good enough for the Sterling name. But Alastair adored her. He defied his father to marry her. She showed me the ring he had made for her, the mate to his own, the phoenix. She said it was their symbol of defiance. Alara listened, her hand clutching the locket under her shirt. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture that was both horrifying and illuminating. Then you were born, Sarah continued, her gaze finally meeting Alara's. Lilia. She named you Lilia. You were the most beautiful baby. Annalise was so happy. Alistair was too, in his own quiet way. He would come and just stare at you for hours. Her face darkened. The night it happened, the fire started late on the floor below maternity. Smoke filled the hallway so fast. It was chaos. Alarms were blaring, people were screaming. I ran to Annalise's room. She was weak from the delivery. I tried to help her up, but a piece of the ceiling collapsed, blocking our way. The smoke was thick, black. Annalise. She pushed you into my arms, Sarah's voice broke. She made me take her ring. For Lilia, she said. So she never forgets, and then she screamed at me. Save my baby! Go! Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I found a service stairwell. I ran. I never looked back. By the time I got outside, the whole wing was engulfed in flames. I heard later that Annalise didn't make it. They said the baby was lost, too. But why did you run? Alara asked, her voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you go to him? To my father. Sarah's eyes filled with that familiar primal fear. Because I was scared, Alara. The fire, it wasn't an accident. I heard things. Whispers between the other nurses. About how convenient it was. About Alistair's father and how much he hated Annalise. I was just a young nurse with no power, no one to believe me. I was holding the sole heiress to the sterling fortune. I was terrified they would come for me, for you, that they would finish the job. So I ran. I changed my name, moved here, and I raised you as my own. I did it to protect you, Lilia. I swear, I only ever wanted to protect you. While this life-altering confession was unfolding in the hospital room, Marcus Thorne was celebrating a victory. After days of digging, his private investigator had found a vulnerability. A minor shoplifting charge from when Alara was 16. Desperate and hungry, she had been caught trying to steal a loaf of bread and some medicine for her mother. The charges were dropped after she completed community service. A minor footnote in a difficult youth. But for Marcus, it was gold. He anonymously leaked the sealed juvenile record, along with a carefully crafted narrative, to a notorious online tabloid. The headline was sensational and cruel. Billionaire's new charity case is a common criminal. Waitress with a rap sheet plays sympathy card for sterling fortune. The article painted Alara as a manipulative, lifelong grifter, using her sick mother as a pawn in a calculated scheme to con a grieving, lonely billionaire. It was a vicious, character-assassinating smear. The story spread like wildfire. By morning, it was the talk of the financial world. Alistair Sterling, a man who fiercely guarded his privacy, was at the center of a sordid scandal. Alistair saw the article on his tablet over his morning coffee. His face, usually a mask of control, tightened into a knot of fury and doubt. He had allowed himself to hope. He had allowed this young woman, with her honest eyes and quiet dignity, to pierce the armor he had worn for 24 years. Now a criminal record, a calculated lie? Had Marcus been right all along? He summoned Alara to his office immediately. When she arrived, her face still pale from the night's revelations, he didn't offer her a seat. He simply turned the tablet around on his desk so she could see the headline. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Alara read the cruel words, her stomach twisting into a painful knot. She saw her teenage mugshot, a picture of a scared, hungry girl, splashed across the screen. The shame was a physical blow. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's true." Alistair's expression hardened. The flicker of hope in his eyes died, replaced by a cold, bitter disappointment. So it was all a lie. The ring. The story. You are a con artist. This was her test. The moment of truth. She could crumble under the weight of his accusation and her own shame. She could become defensive, angry. But looking at this powerful, broken man, who she now knew was her father, she felt a surge of something else entirely. a profound, aching clarity. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his. They were the same eyes she saw in her own reflection. "Yes," she said again, her voice stronger now. "I was 16 years old. My mother couldn't get out of bed, and we hadn't eaten in 2 days. I stole a loaf of bread and a box of aspirin. I was caught and I was ashamed. I still am. That part is true." She took a step closer to the desk, her fear replaced by a righteous fire. "But this," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "is not a con." She opened her handbag and took out the papers she had found. She laid them on the desk in front of him. The birth certificate, the letters from Annalise, the hospital form. "I stole a loaf of bread when I was a hungry teenager, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. "I am not stealing a life. I didn't know any of this until last night. I thought my name was Alara Vance. But it's not. It's Lilia Sterling." She tapped the birth certificate with her finger. "Whether you believe that sleazy article or you believe the truth that is written on this paper is up to you. But I am done with lies." She stood there, vulnerable and defiant, her entire past and future hanging in the balance. She had laid her soul bare, offering him both her deepest shame and her most profound truth. The choice was now his. Alistair stared at the documents on his desk. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he reached for the birth certificate. Lilia Annalise Sterling. The name was a ghost, a whisper he hadn't allowed himself to think for over 2 decades. He picked up one of Annalise's letters, his eyes tracing the familiar, elegant script of his late wife's hand. The words, full of love for him and hope for their child, were a punch to the gut. He looked from the papers to the young woman standing before him. He saw her shame over a teenage mistake, but he also saw the fierce, unshakable integrity in her eyes. It was the same fire he had once loved in Annalise. The tabloid story was designed to create doubt, to paint her as a liar. But her raw, unflinching honesty in admitting her past mistake did the opposite. It made her confession about her identity all the more believable. A con artist would have denied everything. She had owned her truth, all of it. "Harrison," Alistair spoke into his intercom, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Get our legal team. I want every record from the 27th of October 24 years ago, from St. Jude's General. Police reports, fire marshal reports, witness statements, coroner's reports. Everything. And find me the head nurse from the maternity ward that night. Her name was Diana Croft. Find her." He looked back at Alara, his gaze intense, searching. "And schedule a test. A DNA test. Immediately." The next few days were a maelstrom of activity, orchestrated by the full force of Sterling Enterprises. Lawyers and private investigators, the best in the world, descended upon dusty city archives and old record halls. They moved with a quiet, ruthless efficiency, unearthing documents that hadn't seen the light of day in a generation. Alistair kept Alara close, having her stay in a corporate suite in the Sterling Tower. They existed in a strange limbo, a bubble of suspense. They spoke little, but a fragile, unspoken connection began to form between them. He would find her in the suite's library, staring at the city lights, and simply sit with her, the silence filled with the monumental weight of what they might be to each other. He showed her a portrait of Annalise that he kept in his private study. It was the first time Alara had ever truly seen her mother's face, vibrant, intelligent, and full of a gentle warmth. Looking at the painting was like looking at a reflection of a part of herself she had never known. The investigation quickly yielded results. The official report on the St. Jude's fire was thin, ruling it an accidental electrical fire, but Alistair's team found discrepancies. Key witness statements from hospital staff were missing. The fire marshal's initial assessment had raised questions about the speed and intensity of the blaze, suggesting the possible use of an accelerant, but the final report had been sanitized. Then came the breakthrough. The investigators located Diana Croft. The former head nurse was not living the quiet life of a retired civil servant. She was living in a luxurious, multimillion-dollar home in a gated community in Arizona. A deep dive into her financial history revealed the source of her wealth. A single, anonymous wire transfer for $500,000, deposited into a newly opened offshore account 1 week after the fire at St. Jude's. Alastair chartered a private jet. He and Alara, along with 2 of his top lawyers, flew to Arizona. They found Diana Croft tending to her prize-winning roses in a garden that looked like a slice of paradise. She was in her late 60s, a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a pleasant, grandmotherly smile that faltered the moment she saw Alastair Sterling walking up her stone pathway. At first, she denied everything. "St. Jude's? Oh, that was so long ago," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she snipped at a rose bush. "A terrible tragedy. I try not to think about it." But Alastair was relentless. He had his lawyer present her with the financial records, the timeline of the wire transfer, the evidence of the shell corporation it was funneled through. $500,000, Diana?" Alastair said, his voice like ice. "A generous retirement gift. For what? For forgetting to file a few witness statements? Or for something more?" Alara stepped forward. "You were there that night," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You were the head nurse. My mother, Sarah, she was there too. She saved me." Diana Croft looked at Alara, truly looked at her for the first time. She saw the shape of her face, the color of her eyes. She saw Annalise. The gardening shears fell from her hand, clattering on the flagstones. Her face, so carefully composed, crumpled like paper. The lie she had lived with for 24 years finally became too heavy to bear. "He made me do it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "He said it had to be done." "Who?" Alastair demanded. "Who made you do it?" "Your father," she sobbed, the confession tumbling out. "The old man, Alastair Sterling Sr., he hated her. He called her a bohemian parasite. He said she and the baby were a stain on the family name that had to be scrubbed out. He paid me. He paid a man to set the fire, and he paid me to make sure no one from that room got out alive." The confession hung in the air, monstrous and suffocating. Alastair stumbled back a step, as if he had been physically struck. His own father, the cruel, domineering patriarch who had controlled his life until his death a decade ago. He had always known his father was ruthless, but this was an act of pure evil. "But you didn't," Alara said softly. "You didn't kill the baby." Diana shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't. When the chaos started, I went to the room. Annalise was already gone, trapped. But the baby, you were in the bassinet crying. I couldn't do it. Sarah Gable, the young nurse, she was there trying to get to Annalise. I told her to take the baby and run. I told her to disappear and never look back. I lied to your grandfather. I told him both mother and child had perished in the flames. It was the only good thing I ever did." The full, horrifying truth was finally out, uglier and more painful than any of them could have imagined. It wasn't just a secret. It was a crime, a murder, a conspiracy born of hate. They flew back to New York in silence. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Alastair's office. It was from the lab. He opened it with a shaking hand. He read the report, his eyes scanning the clinical language until they found the final, conclusive line. Probability of paternity, 99,999%. He looked up from the paper, his gaze finding Alara, who stood by the window, watching the dawn. The wall he had built around his heart for 24 years didn't just crack. It disintegrated. He walked over to her, the report clutched in his hand. "Lilia," he said, his voice breaking on her name. It was the first time he had said it aloud. She turned to face him. He simply held out the report. She didn't need to read it. She could see the truth in his eyes, in the tears that were, for the first time, streaming down the face of the cold, powerful billionaire. The dam of grief, of loss, of a quarter-century of stolen time, finally broke. Alastair Sterling pulled his daughter into his arms, and for the first time since she was an infant, Lilia Sterling was held by her father. He wept for his lost wife, for the years he had missed, for the lies he had believed. And she wept for the father she never knew she had, for the mother she had just found and lost all at once, and for the simple, overwhelming truth of coming home. In the aftermath of the revelation, a profound shift occurred. The cold, sterile penthouse office transformed into a place of quiet remembrance. Alistair, no longer the distant billionaire but a father consumed by a mix of grief and newfound joy, opened up his world to Lilia. He brought out old photo albums, dusty boxes filled with Annalise's sketches, her journals, her favorite books. For Lilia, it was like piecing together the ghost of a mother she had never known. She saw her mother's smile, read her thoughts, and felt a connection so deep it ached. "She would have been so proud of you," Alistair said one evening, his voice thick with emotion as they looked at a photograph of a pregnant, beaming Annalise. "The woman you've become, your strength, your integrity, that all came from her. Sarah raised you well, but Annalise is in your soul." This period of quiet bonding was the calm before the storm. The truth of the past demanded a reckoning in the present. The first order of business was Marcus. Alistair, now fueled by a protective fury he hadn't felt in decades, called an emergency meeting of the Sterling Enterprises Executive Board. Marcus Thorne arrived at the meeting with a confident swagger. He assumed the emergency session was about the negative press his leak had generated. He had prepared a speech about protecting the company's image and the need for his uncle to distance himself from the Waitress scandal. He felt he was on the verge of a major victory, of finally proving his own indispensability. He entered the boardroom to find it filled with a somber, tense atmosphere. Alistair sat at the head of the long, polished table. Lilia sat to his right, no longer looking like an intimidated waitress, but a woman who belonged there, her quiet composure a stark contrast to Marcus's oily confidence. The company's top legal counsel flanked them. "Thank you for joining us, Marcus," Alistair began, his voice dangerously calm. "I have a few announcements to make," he gestured toward Lilia. "First, I would like to formally introduce you all to my daughter, Lilia Annalise Sterling." A collective gasp went through the room. Marcus's smug smile froze on his face, then twisted into an expression of disbelief. "Daughter? Alistair, have you lost your mind? This is the con artist from the papers. This is absurd." "On the contrary," Alistair said, his voice dropping to an icy tone. He slid a folder across the table toward Marcus. "This is a copy of her birth certificate. And this," he added, sliding another document on top of it, "is the certified result of a DNA test confirming, with 99,999% certainty, that Lilia is my child, who I believed had died in a hospital fire 24 years ago." Marcus stared at the papers, his face turning pale. "This is a trick, a forgery. And this," Alistair continued, his voice rising with cold fury as he pushed a third document across the table, "is the sworn affidavit of a woman named Diana Croft. In it, she confesses that the fire was not an accident. It was arson, an arson ordered and paid for by my own father, Alistair Sterling Sr., to eliminate my wife and child." The boardroom was utterly silent. The revelation was monstrous, a horror from a Gothic novel, not the history of a Fortune 500 company. Marcus was reeling, his world crumbling around him. His entire future, his identity as the heir apparent, was vanishing before his eyes. Panic and rage boiled over. "This is insane," he shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched back. "You can't just bring this gutter rat in here and claim she's your daughter. The Sterling name is mine, my birthright. I've dedicated my life to this company, while you've been rattling around your penthouse like a ghost." In his rage, his arrogance took over. "I was trying to protect you. I was trying to protect this family," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Lilia. "That's why I leaked that story about her pathetic criminal record, to show you what she is, a grifter. I did it to save the Sterling legacy from a nobody." He had done it. In his hubris, he had confessed. The admission hung in the air, damning and absolute. Alistair rose slowly from his chair, his expression one of utter contempt. "Thank you for that clarification, Marcus," he said, his voice chillingly soft. "You have just confirmed that you knowingly and maliciously slandered my daughter and attempted to manipulate me for your own personal gain." He looked around at the stunned faces of the board members. Effective immediately, Marcus Thorne is terminated from his position as COO of Sterling Enterprises. Security will escort him from the premises. Our legal team will begin proceedings tomorrow to have him formally and permanently removed from the family trust on grounds of moral turpitude. "You can't do this," Marcus screamed, his face contorted in a mask of fury and desperation. "I can," Alistair said, his voice like the toll of a bell. "This is my company. This is my family. And you are no longer a part of either." Two security guards entered the room and flanked a sputtering, defeated Marcus. As they led him away, his rants about injustice and birthright echoing down the hall, Lilia reached over and placed her hand on her father's. He took it, his grip firm. The battle was over. The dragon had been slain. Justice, for the present, had been served. In the days that followed, the world was formally introduced to the story of Lilia Sterling. Alistair, with Lilia by his side, held a press conference that silenced the tabloids and captured the world's attention. He didn't just announce his daughter's return. He told the whole story, from the forbidden love he shared with Annalise to the monstrous crime of his own father and the quiet heroism of Sarah Vance. It was a tale of tragedy, resilience, and miraculous redemption. Diana Croft was arrested. Faced with a sworn confession and irrefutable financial evidence, she pled guilty to charges of conspiracy to commit arson and accessory to murder. Her comfortable life in the sun was exchanged for the cold reality of a prison cell. Justice, though delayed by more than 2 decades, had finally found its mark. The most significant announcement at the press conference was the creation of a new, massive charitable organization, the Annalise Sterling Foundation. With an initial endowment of $1 billion from Alistair's personal fortune, its mission was twofold: to provide support, housing, and medical care for struggling single mothers, and to fund arts and education programs for underprivileged youth. Alistair announced that the foundation would be chaired and run by his daughter, Lilia. "My wife was an artist from a humble background," Alistair told the sea of reporters, his voice thick with emotion, "and my daughter was raised by a woman who sacrificed everything for her. This foundation will honor them both. It will turn the pain of our past into a promise for a better future for thousands of others." Lilia, speaking publicly for the first time, was no longer the timid waitress. She spoke with a quiet eloquence and a deep, authentic passion that moved the entire room. She didn't speak of wealth or power, but of hope, second chances, and the simple dignity that every person deserved. Their first act as a reunited family was to visit Sarah. They found her sitting up in a chair by her window, her health dramatically improved. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet, anxious peace. Alistair stood before her, his head bowed. "Sarah," he said, his voice choked with a gratitude so immense it was humbling. "There are no words. You saved my daughter. You protected her. You raised her to be this incredible, strong, kind woman. You gave me back my life." Tears welled in his eyes. "I can never repay you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying. You are family. You will want for nothing, and you will always be honored as the woman who saved Lilia." Sarah looked at Lilia, her Lilia, who smiled at her with a love that was unwavering. Then she looked at the powerful man weeping before her. She reached out a frail hand and patted his arm. "Just take care of our girl," she whispered. And in that quiet hospital room, a new, unconventional, but deeply bonded family was finally whole. Months later, the autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red in the garden outside the window. The office was not in the cold Sterling Tower, but in a beautifully restored brownstone that served as the headquarters for the Annalise Sterling Foundation. The room was filled with light, the walls adorned not with corporate art, but with vibrant paintings from young, aspiring artists the foundation was sponsoring. Lilia sat at a large wooden desk, not unlike her father's, but hers was covered in grant applications and project proposals, not market reports. She was dressed in an elegant but simple navy blue dress, her face a portrait of focused purpose. She was reviewing an application from a women's shelter, her brow furrowed in concentration, when the door opened softly. Alistair came in holding 2 ceramic mugs. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater, the severe suit of the billionaire replaced by the comfortable attire of a father. He walked over and placed one of the mugs on her desk. "Coffee. Black," he said, a gentle smile playing on his lips. Lilia looked up and smiled back, a warm, easy expression that lit up her entire face. "Thank you, Dad." He leaned against the desk, sipping his own coffee, looking around the room. His gaze settled on the wall behind her desk. There, in a place of honor, hung the beautiful portrait of Annalise. And next to it, in a small, simple frame, was the locket Lilia had worn for 24 years, now hanging open to show the faded picture of the man she now knew, and the tiny, folded lullaby her mother had written for her. "She would love this," Alistair said quietly, his voice full of a peaceful melancholy. "Everything you're doing. This is her legacy." "It's our legacy," Lilia corrected him softly. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, a father and daughter who had found each other across an ocean of time and lies. The pain of the past was not gone, but it had been transformed. The ashes of a terrible fire had given birth to a new hope, a new purpose. The phoenix, the symbol that had started it all, had finally, truly taken flight. This story teaches us that our true inheritance is not money or power, but the integrity we carry in our hearts. It shows that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always fight its way to the light, and that kindness, given without expectation of reward, is the most powerful currency in the world. For in the end, are we not all connected by invisible threads of history, chance, and choice, waiting for the right moment to reveal who we were always meant to be? If the story of hope and vindication touched your heart, please share it with others who believe in second chances. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the enduring power of truth.